What is up, U.S. history? How's it going, guys? Today we are going to get started on our new section, America in the 1920s. As you can see up here, we are moving past, like I said, we're kind of moving past the World War One section that we were on before the end of school, and we've obviously missed a week and all that stuff, so I'm ready to move on to the 1920s. This chapter is going to kind of cover the 1920s, what it meant for the United States, what happened in the United States, what changed, what stayed the same, and eventually going to lead us into Black Tuesday, which signifies the start of the Great Depression, which obviously, as we saw in the movie Cinderella Man Before Break, is one of the most financially, economically struggling times the United States has ever been in, and that led to a big change in how we process the economy, how the stock market is observed, and how it works, and many other things. So, the 1920s is a product of World War One. World War One comes to an end, and with the end of World War One, we saw a mass return of soldiers back from Europe that led to families being reunited. Not quite baby boomer status after World War II, but obviously a large increase in children about to be born, and families wanting to get together and do stuff. So in this 1920s, we had just had World War One, right? The Great War ends, and people are realizing life is pretty precious, right? There's a lot of things that they could have lost in World War One, including their lives, their families, fathers, and out of this comes a society that wants to do more. They want to do things. They want to experience happiness, and that is where we're headed. And one thing that allows us to experience more happiness and experience more things is money. The flow of money that people in post World War One were accruing. Some of this is from men going off to war, getting paid well for fighting in the war until the Great Depression strikes, and also the increase in amount of jobs that were available for women. So women can now work. And so when you have this two-income home, right, it's like during World War One, you have men fighting in the war on this hand, and you have women making money in factories or sewing or being assistants or whatever, but more jobs opened up for women because the men were at war. You put both of their incomes together and you get, double the income. And with double that income, families were able to spend that money on more than just the necessities. And so one big thing to realize as well is that during World War One, what were women and men spending their money on? Almost nothing, right? The men were gone, so it's not like women were going out to dinner with their families because the husbands were gone. They were at work as well. And so it created this era where the men hadn't spent money in World War One, the women hadn't spent more money in World War One, and we put it together and we have an excess of funds, and people started to invest that money in stocks. They started to go to the movies. They started to, buy nicer clothes. They started to do things they wanted. And we're going to continue to talk about this idea of social change in the 1920s, because as you guys know, the 1920s, the Jazz Age, the Roaring Twenties, the Gatsby era, all of these different kind of synonymous names that have come out about it. Very, very interesting time socially for the United States. Maybe one of the biggest social changes since maybe the Great Enlightenment or something like that, where the mind of the average American is going to change so drastically, right? In the Great Awakening or the Enlightenment, it was solely based around religion and how changing how they viewed religion could change society as a whole, right? Now it's social. It's very social. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so one of the biggest things that comes into mind is this idea of old America versus new America. Traditionalism versus modernism, right? Old-fashioned values versus progress. New thoughts. Science backing things up. And when you break that down to the core, in the United States, one of the biggest differences was the religion, the Bible, creationism versus science, evolution. And one of the biggest times we see this in the 1920s is in schools. Schools at this time in most states were not teaching evolution. It was actually in some states against the law to teach evolution. And so in one of these states was Tennessee. And so, as this idea of traditionalism versus modernism is kind of exploding in the United States, it's the 1920s, 1925 specifically for this case. We have a, a high school biology teacher named John T. Scopes. All right, and this becomes known as the Scopes monkey trial because we're talking about evolution, and obviously the humans evolving through monkeys is kind of the general thing that people will talk about evolution. And so, in Tennessee, it was illegal for a teacher to teach evolution. They had to teach it from the Bible's perspective because separation of church and state still hadn't been fully adopted yet, and that was kind of where we're headed in the 1920s. Is do we want to stay traditional or move forward with modern thought processes on everything, including how schools are taught and stuff? And so John T. Scopes teaches biology, or he teaches biology, and in class one day he decides that he's going to teach evolution. That was illegal. And so he gets arrested. One of the students, or someone ends up telling on them. They call the cops, basically. He gets arrested. He goes to trial. All of this stuff happens. Now, this may seem a little bit crazy to you, right? And I hate to tell you this, but so much of U.S. history is like, I don't want to say fake, because it's not fake. This trial happened, but it's planned, right? It's executed nicely. Same thing, Rosa Parks, John Scopes, many, many other things. They are major issues that the United States wanted to address. Religion in schools, creationism versus evolution. That was a major issue that people wanted to address, but they just couldn't bring it up. It had to be brought up in trial in court because that's the way the United States works, right? If you want something changed, legislation has to change it. You just can't will your way into, changing something. Now you can press for it, you can push for it, you can, protest for it, you can do whatever, but it has to go to court and to trial. And so the ACLU, as you guys can see right here, I'm getting my laser pointer. The ACLU stands for the American Civil Liberties Union. All right, American Civil Liberties Union. And so I told you guys in my little introductory video, we are going to be doing some checks and stuff like that. And I want to make sure you guys are watching these videos. So because it's replacing the lecture. I understand you guys can just read through the PowerPoints and stuff like that. But I want to make sure you guys are watching the videos because I'm going to say a lot of things and talk about a lot of things maybe that you won't get on your own from reading the notes. So I need you guys to be watching these videos. So on some of these quizzes, there will be little things in there that aren't in the notes necessarily, right? So if I ask on a little 2 or 3 question check about today's section of the notes, right? And I say, what does ACLU stand for? Hopefully you're going through and writing this stuff down that you don't know or isn't in the notes. So I should have done this before I started, but I'll do it now. I don't care how you guys do the notes, right? Whatever's going to work best for you as we go through. You do need to watch these videos. All right, I understand that it's long and boring. I'm going to try to break it up in, maybe like a half hour, an hour a day, whatever, of watching notes. And we'll have like little checks or discussion boards or whatever, or worksheets on the topic of the day, right? You can print out the PowerPoints. The PowerPoints are on Moodle. You can just follow along. You can write down notes like you would in class while following this video. And if I get ahead of you or I'm going too fast, you can obviously just pause the video and catch up that way. Whatever works for you. In this section, I've actually provided you blank notes that you can fill in as we go along together, and maybe that'll give you the first week transition a little easier for you guys. Whatever works best for you, though, taking notes is what you're going to have to do. So, yeah, but like I said, I'm going to have little checks and stuff to make sure we're understanding the content and you guys are processing and really getting the knowledge. And in that... I may ask some things like, what does the ACLU stand for? And somebody who did not watch the video is going to have no clue unless they know already. But somebody who did will be, oh, okay, ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. Put that down. Write that down. All right. So, the ACLU, who has fought in many, many civil rights cases throughout American history, including Rosa Parks in the back of the bus situation, and this Scopes monkey trial, decide that they want to challenge the Tennessee law. Now again, you can't just say, I want to challenge the law. You have to have it go to court. And the way it goes to court is if somebody gets arrested and there's a trial. So John T. Scopes is the man. for the job. And John Scopes is actually not is not a biology teacher. He's actually a football coach and a substitute teacher who teaches biology when he's called upon to teach biology. So he's not the actual teacher of the class. Now, the reason they picked John Scopes, and they always pick somebody who's going to exemplify or like their values or really reach out and call to the American public, right? Like if we think about Rosa Parks, right? Why Rosa Parks? Why did they pick her? They could have picked anybody. They could have picked, a black man, a black boy, a black young girl, a black old lady like they did. They could have picked a black woman, married, unmarried, but why would they pick Rosa Parks? She was when this case goes to trial, these big public things are going to be recognized by people, right? People are interested in monumental decisions, abortion, like Roe versus Wade, Bible versus science, right? Scopes monkey trial, civil rights issues in the African American community, like riding in the back of the bus, Rosa Parks, right? These things are monumental decisions that affect people, their children, right? And so they're very interested in these decisions. And so why would you pick somebody like Rosa Parks? Well, you can't pick a young black woman with a child who's unmarried, right? People won't support that. You have to pick somebody that appeals to the senses, right? If there's a racist person or somebody who doesn't think black people deserve the rights on the bus or whatever it is, they went out and picked an old elderly woman who needed to sit down, didn't argue and fight with the police, didn't have a criminal record, didn't have any reason that she was being segregated, except for that she was black. And they tried it in court, and so people felt more sympathetic towards Rosa Parks. It's kind of the same thing with John Scopes. They picked a football coach, a nice big strong guy, right, who could stand behind his morals, who was fighting the system directly. And so John Scopes, when he did this, he knew he was breaking the law. He knew he was going to get arrested. But the ACLU, much like with Rosa Parks, posted his bail that night, so he was out of jail that night. It went before the Tennessee court system and things like that. And one of the most famous court cases, maybe up to like O.J. Simpson or something like that, in American history ensues, and it's John Scopes, the Scopes monkey trial. And so what we have is now we have Clarence Darrow, the ACLU lawyer, one of the most prolific lawyers in the history of lawyering, or I don't know what you would call that, in the history of I'm just gonna say lawyering. So he was one of the greatest. He fought for civil rights. He won many cases, and even when he didn't win, he still opened people's eyes, brought light. If they weren't ready for that change, Clarence Darrow was there to say, "This change is ready for you," right? And so that was important. And he was going up against the defendant, William Jennings Bryan, or the special prosecutor, William Jennings Bryan. All right, William Jennings Bryan, a very interesting man in American history. He's very involved in the political spectrum. He was a very fundamental Christian. He defended the law and the Bible, and he ran for president 3 times. He failed all 3 times. He does hold the designation as being the youngest candidate we've ever had in the United States. He was 36 years old, and if you guys remember, you have to be how old to run for president? 35, right. And so he barely went right when he turned 36. The first time he could run, he ran for president. He fails all 3 times, unfortunately, for William, but he does. And so he is a fundamental Christian going up against Clarence Darrow, who is a vocal atheist. He does not believe in God. Okay, and so these two are going up against each other in the most public court case we've ever had, and it's almost bigger than the idea of evolution, right? It's really somebody's fighting for Christianity to stay in the public space, right? In schools, in government, and one guy is fighting for Christianity and the Bible to not be used in those public spaces, separation of church and state, which is this huge difference between traditionalism or modernism. It's a huge shift in the United States. And so these guys duke it out big time. And Clarence Darrow, for the most part, there's some discrepancies. There's a movie called I can't remember, Into the Wild, or I don't know. It's about the Scopes Monkey trial, but in the movie, William Jennings Bryan gets absolutely dismantled on the stand. He's embarrassed. He dies like 2 weeks later from like embarrassment, a broken heart, because Clarence Darrow, the atheist, is like absolutely hitting him about all of these, questions about Christianity that he can't answer, and he's embarrassed and he's distraught, and he dies 2 weeks later, and all this stuff. And however, the court's transcripts show it to be a much more equal argument, and so what? I don't think that's it, but that's fine. Nice, thank you. It's all good. Everybody, this is my brother Aaron. This is my brother. He's bringing me something for my microphone, so sorry. No worries. Yes, so. Oh, I forgot what I was talking about. Yes, so William Jennings Bryan gets after it. They argue very much. It's a very public trial, and it turns into a media circus, right? Everybody around the world is learning about this. Everybody is talking about this. And actually, William Jennings Bryan loses the case in every perspective. He gets embarrassed. He doesn't defend it well. He doesn't make people feel like it should stay in schools, that evolution shouldn't be taught. However, Clarence Darrow asks the judge, or asks the jury, to make a guilty verdict. He wants John T. Scopes to fail. He wants John T. Scopes to go to he's not going to go to jail, it's a fine. He wants him to lose the case because he wants the case to go to the Tennessee State Supreme Court, because then it can go higher and higher in the court system until it goes to the Supreme Court. And that's what happens. He's found guilty. Clarence Darrow actually loses the case, but wins in the perspective that he wanted to make a point, which he did, and boost the case to the Supreme Court in Tennessee, which it did. However, the Tennessee Supreme Court doesn't actually try the case because they think it's kind of a joke. But his job was done. Scopes found guilty, and that's kind of the Scopes monkey trial. It was this huge question of traditionalism versus modernism. Should things stay the same? Should they be different? And in this aspect, it looked like things were moving different. Scopes does get fined. The ACLU pays the whole fine. He gets out of it. He's fine. And it opened up the conversation of traditionalism versus modernism. Evolution versus creationism. Moving on, another thing here in this idea of traditionalism versus modernism. Prohibition. You guys know what prohibition is. You know it's the 18th Amendment right here. Hopefully you still remember that. Passed in the year 1920, right at this roaring 20s era, known as the Noble Experiment. Some interesting stuff here. As you guys know, prohibition, 18th Amendment, the only amendment to be repealed in the United States Constitution, with number 21 saying, whoops, we made a mistake. Let's take that out like no one will notice. However, it leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. For many, many years, that prohibition was a thing. It failed. It cost the United States millions and millions of dollars. And it cost businesses millions of dollars and things like that. And it is one of the biggest blemishes in the United States constitutional history because we had to repeal it. So, one interesting thing about prohibition that I think a lot of people don't notice is drinking alcohol. The consumption of alcohol, this should say is not, that's my bad, but the consumption of alcohol, let's mark that out. Here we go. Oh, that's the wrong button. One second. Here we go. Pen. Oh, yep. Okay. Yeah. All right. There we go. The transportation, the buying, selling, importing, and making of alcohol became illegal. You couldn't do any of those things. However, you could drink alcohol. You could drink as much as you wanted. But if you had the alcohol is where you would be breaking the law. So when it's passed in 1920, there's a couple loopholes in prohibition. If any alcohol you had before the passage of the amendment got grandfathered in and you could drink it. Doctors could still prescribe alcohol as for medicinal purposes, which they did not commonly, but sometimes in this time period. And so it became this idea of transporting alcohol, making the alcohol, selling, importing the alcohol that made it illegal, not the actual consumption. So when we talk about speakeasies and stuff, it's not the consumption, the people drinking it that were breaking the law. It was the people serving it that were breaking the law. Um, Prohibition was pushed primarily by these temperance and Christian groups. Now, the big group that made up both of these were women. Women were lobbying very hard for civil rights, not only theirs in the idea of their right to vote, which we'll talk about very soon, but they lobbied for civil rights in African Americans. They lobbied for rights of immigrants like the Irish who were coming across to New York area, to that East Coast area, working on the docks and things like that. They also, excuse me, they also were fighting for uh, this idea of modernism, changing things. Traditional values weren't the same. Um, and so the women were fighting for this. The biggest one was called the WCTU, the Women's Temperance Christian Union. That's one you should write down. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU, was leading the charge along with another group called the Dries, and the Dries obviously were fighting for the drying of the United States alcohol, no alcohol in the country. And there was a couple reasons that they believed that this should be a thing. They believed that alcohol, one, men were spending way too much money on it, making poverty levels increase. Two, that men were getting drunk much too often, making them useless when they got home from work, or abusive. So one of the biggest arguments here was the idea that temperance and Christian groups wanted abuse and poverty to be reduced. And one of the reasons they wanted it to be reduced was obviously to help the home, the children, the household, finances, all of that stuff. And so they believed if they could get alcohol banned, it would be a success. We know it necessarily wasn't because they repeal it. But women led the charge in this idea. All right. Next up, we got a nice little picture here of the WCTU themselves, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. I think this needs an exclamation point. Let me give a yes. Right? Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. And look how serious these women look. These women do not look like somebody I'd want to mess with, especially this lady right here. This lady looks very serious about not drinking liquor. The WCTU, fighting for many, many things in the civil rights spectrum, or the civil rights arena, I guess. Next up, more traditionalism. Before we get started here, can anybody tell me who a picture of this stunning young man is down here with those large lips and cigar? None other than Scarface himself, Al Capone. Al Capone becomes a millionaire in this time period of Prohibition because the use of alcohol did not go away. People found ways to get drunk. During this whole time, all right, we have presidents who, President FDR eventually becomes president during Prohibition, and he is against Prohibition. He actually runs on the idea that he will get rid of Prohibition, and he has a lot of trouble because I believe it was him who had a large wine collection, and when he got elected, he had to find a way to transport the wine from his home to the White House, and it was illegal to transport alcohol, so he couldn't do it himself. He couldn't hire anybody to do it. So till Prohibition, I believed his large collection of wine actually stayed at his home because it was illegal to transport. When it does get repealed, FDR said, he was quoted saying, "You know what America could use now? A real big drink," because he knew that people were ready to get back to this drinking for whatever purpose that they had, and America was ready to move past this blemish in the United States that had tainted finances, the economy, and other things, the noble experiment had failed pretty miserably. Um, FDR, after he said America could use a nice big drink, he actually orders a truckload of Yuengling beer. I don't know what that is, but Yuengling beer was one of his favorites, he says. And the day Prohibition ended, he ordered a truckload of Yuengling beer to the White House. And him and his constituents had a nice big drink. So in this time of Prohibition, organized crime grows, right? And you guys have heard the stories, seen the movies of Al Capone and the gangsters, right, with their Tommy guns, riding around with those the cars with the boards on the side, the drive-by shootings and stuff like that. That is all pretty accurate. I don't think it was as across the United States. It wasn't as rampant as some people may like to think. Al Capone himself operated mostly in Chicago and New York. New York had over 100,000 speakeasies, right? Which is incredible when you think about it. So organized crime grows. Large amounts of money could be made smuggling or transporting alcohol. It wasn't about the consumption portion, right? People weren't breaking the law by drinking it, like I said. But they needed somebody to transport the alcohol, and that's where Al Capone stepped in and built his empire. For many years, he made nearly $60 million a year organized crime, smuggling alcohol. And now in this, he did have a lot of run-ins with the police. You guys may have heard of the Valentine's Day Massacre, which is the day Al Capone ordered the murder of more cops on any single given day than any other day when he was in charge, or running the gangs in the streets and stuff like that. But many organized crime members had ties and money in corruption in the police force, judges, lawyers. They had people on pay so that they could get away with things. Al Capone threatened people, broke kneecaps, shot people, all these different crazy things. And it led to this creation of this organized crime underground society type thing that made him one of the most powerful people in the United States, financially and just network-wise, connections to people. This created speakeasies, illegal saloons. You guys have seen these before, I'm sure. Restaurants try to recreate this look. People try to make it in movies and stuff like that, where you go through the laundromat, and if you open the right door, it opens this room into a secret bar. And in this bar, you saw people who wanted to drink. And people drinking there could be cops, the normal person, whatever it was, just trying their best to get a drink. Illegal saloons popped up all over the United States. The main focus in New York, like I said, over 100,000 illegal saloons in New York alone. But bribes, law enforcement corruption, all this disrespect, very common in the organized crime world. One other interesting thing that happened here is Dr. Seuss got his pen name. His real name is Theodore something, and I forget it. But Theodore something, I forget it, was caught drinking with a group of friends on his college campus at the time. And he got kicked out of his writing program, and people wouldn't accept his work because he broke the law. And so he went under the alias Dr. Seuss, and that's where he got his name from. So thank you, Prohibition, right? Thank you, alcohol. But yeah, bribes, law enforcement, all these things start to build up. And in 1933, the 21st Amendment is passed, repealing Prohibition, ending the noble experiment with a big black eye, because it did not work. Alright, more on this idea of traditionalism, old-fashioned values, and modernism, right? And so we've talked about a couple things, this idea of religion, this idea of prohibition, social change, and now another change in a social arena is women. So during World War I, women showed out. They did a lot during for the workforce. They worked in military jobs, civilian jobs, factory jobs. Anyway, they could help out the United States. They were doing that, and they were earning a wage, paying taxes, and by paying taxes, They're contributing and fueling the economy, and by earning a wage, they're contributing and fueling their home life. And with that money, if they were married, their family had more money to do things, to buy more food, to buy more luxury items, go to the movies together, whatever it was. If they were single, they could spend it on, dresses, hairstyles, cigarettes, whatever it was. And we start to see this change in women in the United States. The 1920s, maybe the biggest social change for women that we've ever seen, because they went from being this at home, couldn't get a job, no one would hire them, no money, and now they're breaking out of this box that they were cooped up in of only being, secretaries or seamstresses. And now they've shown they can work in the factories. They've shown they can do these other jobs and earn a wage. And so what they're doing now is they have their own money, and with that money, they're going to become flappers. They're going to become these girls and these women who do what they want to do, not what they're told to do. And that's going to change the entire dynamic of the United States. In 1920, the Women's Suffrage Amendment is granted, giving women the right to vote in 1920. The first state to allow women to vote was actually in 1869. It allowed any woman over the age of 21 the right to vote. Today they are known as the Equality State for obvious reasons now. And does anyone know who that is? Wyoming. Wyoming, the Equality State, the first state to give women the right to vote, 1869, nearly 50 years ahead of its time when the 19th Amendment is passed in 1920. And this was all that women had wanted for so long, right? They had fought for so many different things. Temperance, abolition, right? All of these different things that they were fighting for. Now it was their time to succeed and their time to shine, because they're given this right to vote. And now with the right to vote, they have a voice. They can change things based in government like it's supposed to be. And 8 days after this amendment is passed, nearly 10 million women have already signed up to register to vote. And so with an influx of 10 million new votes, it may be the biggest direct change to the electorate or the electoral college that we've ever seen, because millions and millions of women sign up. And that's within 8 days, so you can tell over the years how many more millions of new voters with new ideals, new ideas, new desires for the country and for themselves changed the way we were gonna the government was gonna run, because a whole new block of voters was now available to vote. So pretty interesting stuff there when women get the right to vote. Now, continuing on with this, actually, the 19th Amendment, before I move on from this, the last state to ratify it was Mississippi. Mississippi didn't ratify the 19th Amendment. Now, it didn't matter, because this is a federal amendment. It's a federal law. It was ratified quite quickly in 1920. And it only needed 3/4 of the state to pass. But the last state to ratify it, meaning that they agreed with it and that they chose to follow it instead of being forced to by the federal government, was Mississippi. And they didn't do that until 1984. 1984. All right? So women's appearances change, and this is that idea of being called a flapper, right? We see these in The Great Gatsby. We hear about this idea of being a flapper all the time. And so flappers are these girls who were changing the norm of what a woman should be, what she should look like, how she should act, how she should be out in public, all of these different things. Because up until then, there was a pretty traditional view of how women should act. And now we're pushing for this more modern woman that can wear short skirts, right? That doesn't have to wear a dress, that can wear jeans, that can cut her hair however she wants. It doesn't have to be this long hair that they do and keep down all the time. They can put their hair up, they can cut their hair short. The bob hairstyle becomes very popular in the 1920s. The short poodle skirts become popular. Women are smoking and drinking out in public with their other girlfriends, and this wasn't something you would traditionally see in the United States at this point. This was very different for people to see and to process and understand. and accept for a lot of people. The fact that a woman could go out to a movie with her friend or go out to get her nails done with her friend and be smoking a cigarette while she's waiting her turn or whatever was revolutionary. It changed the ideal of what a woman should be. It modernized, right, progress, what a woman should be. And for a lot of people, it was pretty revolutionary. They became known as flappers, women who adopted new styles and attitudes. And so, like I've said, with all of this, it all kind of ties together. These women can't do these things, get these haircuts, get short skirts, buy cigarettes, unless they were working women, because they needed the money to spend on themselves. And so, with this new change in jobs, coming from World War I, women now had more avenue, more income, cash, money to go spend on things that they wanted to do. Imagine that. And we see a change like this across all families, right? Like the whole family can do something more because two people are now working jobs or whatever the case may be. And with that, we see a change in traditionalism versus modernism. All right? One more thing going on here, just new jobs available to women, improved status. Again, the type of jobs they were doing, how much they were getting paid, changed pretty majorly. However, with all of this being said, I don't want to miss the mark in saying women's place is still in the home in the 1920s. It still is very widely accepted and considered that women should stay home during the 1920s. They could work. There was a lot more jobs for them. There was nicer jobs for them. But still, the commonplace was women should stay in the home and be mothers. All right. With that, I think, yes, the next slide is on society and change, which is number 2, which I think is where we're going to stop today. All right. So we're going to go back here. Traditionalism versus modernism, this idea that things were very different, right? Things were headed in a different direction, and not just because people wanted to, but because people could. I think that's so important, that people could do different things, right? And that's like why, modern things change because they can, right? We like modern now, everybody, it's all on the cell phone, right? It's all in apps, it's all in social media because we can be on social media, because we have the ability to, due to technology, due to money, right? We can afford a $1,000 phone, right? Going out with your friends and hanging out is very different, right? Like modern communication with your friends is texting versus back, in the 70s, where it was like you had to call and their parents would answer, but now you can just text your friends, whatever, right? It's because we can do those things. So and the reason for could or can changes. In the 1920s, it was money. It was income. Women working 2 jobs, right? For us in the 2020, it's technology. We can do these things because technology allows us to. And so how that will change in the future, who knows? The idea of ideals and traditions are changing is very important here too, right? The idea that church versus state religion is going to change in the United States because we're at a point where we can talk about changing that, because we have all these different ideals, different people, right? We have immigrants coming in, we have generations later of people being born. So very interesting time in the United States, the roaring 20s. Money is flying around. We're going to talk about people are going to, the Harlem Renaissance is popping. People are making art, music, right? Women are voting. We have all of these things. Babe Ruth is hitting balls out of the park, right? Charles Lindbergh is flying planes across the Atlantic Ocean. All of these crazy, crazy things are happening, and people want to see them. So when people want to pay to see them, people want to do them. And if they want to get the money for doing something, they have to do it better, or they have to do it faster, or nicer, or cleaner, or smarter, or whatever that is. If it's hitting a baseball out of the park, or it's creating a processor that can send Morse code, and that evolves into texting decades later. So all of these big changes happening in the United States. So that's it for day 1 of online classroom notes, guys. Thanks for sticking through. We're going to be in this together. So hopefully you guys enjoy watching these little videos, following along with your notes, just kind of putting yourself back in the classroom with me. But that's it. Traditionalism versus modernism. right now. I am going to post your first discussion board on Moodle, so make sure you check that out after you watch this video. It's going to be a nice little fun thing to make sure we all understand how discussion boards work, and I'll probably have on there one or two things about this lesson that you guys can do check for understanding and stuff. I think tomorrow is going to be taking a look at communism and the Americans' view on communism, and we're gonna watch. Like, I'm gonna put some YouTube videos on there to watch those videos for you guys, so that you understand them. And communism, because again, that's one thing we had to skip over, was the Bolshevik Revolution, which creates communism in Russia. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a great class. I miss you guys. I will see y'all later. Have a great day.